Hello, Tom Lebecki here with the latest edition of a special edition of the Armchair NBA. Got a special guest today, a returning guest and co-host. As we know, the rise and fall of Pablo Escobar left a vacuum, hence rise the Mexicans. And I'll probably lead a little bit in with some of how the Italian mafia fits in today on the Armchair NBA. Hello, Tom Lebecki here with a special live and birthday edition of the Armchair NBA. I am very old, but I am here with my much younger co-host, Jeff Nadu. Welcome back to the Armchair NBA. How you doing, buddy?
Good, Tom. Thanks for having me back. Happy birthday to you. What are you, 26 today or what? What's going on with you? How old are you now?
Add the legal drinking age onto that, and then you hit the head.
Well, you're getting to that point where you're in middle age. Nothing wrong with that.
I have myself at kind of a hockey game, more like a hockey game, and I'm like 2 minutes left in the second quarter. Yeah, halftime might be pushing it, but I'll take that, Jeff. So
You still have plenty of time left.
Jeff and I haven't linked up in a while. There's a lot to cover. We want to kind of switch it up a little bit. Also, I do want to ask him about a Sammy interview. Him and I both had the pleasure of interviewing Sammy. We kind of had different angles there. And we'll catch up, chop it up a little bit. I don't do a lot of lives, as you guys know, but I wanted Jeff to come on. And so, Jeff, welcome. So let's start off with, all right. So I interviewed Pablo Escobar's wife. Obviously, when he passed, his reign was over. He didn't really have an exit strategy. He didn't have a succession plan. He was a monarchy. Then the kind of, as we know, the Cali cartel kind of jumped in along with Don Berna, who was part of the search block assistance. So, he had institutional power. But over the years after that, the Mexicans took over. And then specifically, I believe we're going to talk about the Gulf Cartel and Zetas, which I find extremely interesting. So I'm going to kind of acquiesce to you on kind of like handing the torch off there. I'll probably have some questions, but give us kind of a little bit after, even the Don Berna reign, even after the Cali kind of went on the wayside and the Mexicans picked up. Walk us through that, Jeff.
Interestingly enough, Tom, the founder of the Gulf Cartel, Juan Garcia Abreu, actually began working with the Cali cartel. That's how he was getting cocaine into Mexico. And you think of it like, I've heard it regarded as like kind of a trampoline in a way, where the cocaine was coming from Colombia into Mexico and then bouncing into the United States, right?
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of these cartels, whether it was the Guadalajara cartel, the Gulf cartel, ultimately, those are the two big cartels in Mexico, preferably in the beginning, the Guadalajara cartel, which had your Cari Quintero, Felix Gallardo, the big boys, the ones that down the road would be arrested and these other cartels would start. But Juan Garcia Abreu was kind of the first, at least in right below the Texas border. You have to remember, Tom, Texas shares a 1,254-mile border with Mexico. So there are all sorts of these different border points where, sending drugs into the United States is extremely profitable. And Garcia Abreu really kind of began that, working through the Cali cartel, kind of innovating that process, cutting down how much shipments cost. And at one point, he's kind of the foremost authority of sending drugs into this country through Mexico. He's a guy that came up in Tamaulipas, which is directly south of Texas, really at the border points that we hear on television now, whether it's Nuevo Laredo or whatever. Tamaulipas is right there. You have cities like Reynosa, Matamoros, those places. So Juan Garcia Abreu was really kind of the start, and he was the one that would ultimately create the Gulf Cartel.
Now, and to kind of go back for a second, in my opinion, also, and obviously this is some of the fact, is what made Pablo strong and even Cali strong was the distribution to Miami, to New York on the Eastern Seaboard. It's funny, they shut that down pretty quickly. They can't shut down the other one in Mexico. We'll discuss that in a minute. But that was reason, I believe, the rise also kind of the conduit that said, hey, you know what? Like we can't use this side anymore. We need the Mexicans. Can you speak a little bit too about their heritage on being really strong pot smugglers to create the channel and then later to put cocaine in there?
Yeah, I mean, it really has been kind of a kind of a antithesis of to different things, right? You started with, as you talked about, marijuana, right? You're growing marijuana in these remote places in Mexico,
Yeah,
and really everyone was part of that, right? The farmers, the low end people, everyone seemed to have marijuana plantations inside their farming communities,
correct.
whether it's in Sinaloa or Tamaulipas or wherever. So that was something they were largely involved in. Opium as well. I mean, obviously,
Yes,
if you know anything about the creation of heroin, opium was very big as well. So, yeah, it's kind of been an antithesis of going from what was profitable, what was easy to create, and what was something. And you look at down the road, ultimately to today, where you have stuff where the problem with marijuana when you cultivate it is you have to use it's almost like growing plants. You have to put tons of it is growing plants.
a lot
You
of
have to put
resources.
the time into it, whether it's irrigation, whether it's planting it, whether it's cultivating it. Some of the drugs now it's so different where you really don't need any oversight. You look at methamphetamine.
Correct.
Methamphetamine takes a ton of time to create and
Yep.
produce, right? So it's cutting into that it's taking up more time. So it's cutting out the middlemen, it's cutting out those things, and just going to the source of some of this stuff and just saying, you know what, send it to us. We
Sure.
can grab it, repackage it, and send it in. And that was cocaine, really, right? Because they didn't have to do any of the heavy lifting.
Now you bring up a good point, and this goes for business, any business, your career. They say luck is the intersection of hard work and opportunity. Um, Maybe I'm stretching a little bit, but I look like you look at the pizza connection. The Italians kind of largely got out of the heroin game in the 80s. Maybe got picked up by some of the Middle Eastern, maybe Asian. But I believe, from my opinion, the Mexicans, like you said, they had the kind of the channels already set, right? The smuggling set up. So hey, we have weed. Wow, you know what? Pablo got shut down. Give us your coke. We got you, right? And then also opium, which could be grown in Mexico. I think their rise was in lieu of the fall of the Colombian drug lords and the fall of the Italian mafia, the Sicilian mafia in New York. You agree with that statement?
Well, of course, and that's the growing, kind of I don't know if it's the laugh factor of the drug war, right? Because it really just goes to someone else, right? It's simple. Like you go to a drug corner and you arrest the chief on the corner. Well, someone's going to come right in and grab the piece of the pie. And the Mexican people, as I said, the people that are doing this sort of thing, it was really just kind of a domino effect, going from one thing to another thing to another thing, and yes, filling the power vacuum.
Yeah.
These cartels are smart in the end, and they were laying the groundwork of getting in the most profitable things possible. And in the end, it's all about just cutting out what takes more time and going with what's easier, working hard, not working harder, working smarter. And, by selling stuff like cocaine, you have to remember during this time period as well, the 80s and late 70s were a huge boom for cocaine in this country. So whether it's Miami, whether it's Mexico,
Yeah.
this country is fueling the drug war. It consumes tons of cocaine, and there's a need, and everyone can get involved with the piece of the pie. So I don't think it's just essentially there wasn't just one group that was doing this. There were multiple groups, and the people that made the most money were Colombia because they were the starting point for all this.
Now, I think I might have asked you this before, and we have a lot of new viewers and a lot of people on replay. And I ask every guest this. Let's remove the morality out of it. The five families were strong. Let's be candid, probably up to the late '80s. Did the mob mess up by not going to the cartel saying, "Hey, give us New York, we got distro. Maybe give us Boston, Philly, maybe Florida. I don't know, right? Like, did a mob make a mistake by not getting into the cocaine boom? I know longer sentences, more rats, but they also would have got extremely wealthy. Where do you land on that, Jeff? Hey,
Yeah, I'm
James.
fascinated. I'm fascinated by it because I think that's the one thing that the mob, you know, I think in the end, like a lot of these criminal organizations, the one reason cartels are so successful is because they are ruthless people. They have
Correct.
no problem getting involved in anything. In the end, they're criminals, Tom. I
Correct.
think the mob almost had this kind of we're too good to sell drugs. When in
Yeah.
the end, they should have just realized they're criminals. We got to get as much money as we can in a short period of time. And look, I give respect to some of the guys that were able to do that. The
Yeah.
Carmine Galantes of the
Yeah.
world, the Big John Ormentos, guys that were smart and understanding that the real money is in the drug game. And I think that's the thing about the mafia. One of the reasons they are not an effective group now is because they are not, to me, ruthless enough. I don't think the mob, in the grand scheme of things, was ruthless at all. I mean, you look at some of the way these cartels operate, some of these street gangs operate. That's a real criminal. That's how you really gain power and respect. And look, they had the things, the mafia, whether it was labor racketeering, things like that. But I think you make a good point. The problem is, and we're seeing this today, it's hard to sell drugs in this country. And, in the end, I don't think the mafia was ruthless enough to do this sort of thing. And that was fine. They were making enough money anyway. But I think the piece of the pie could have been so much bigger. And I've always been fascinated as to why they didn't get involved. But I guess they just looked at it as, we don't need this stink on us. We don't need, I think I always liken it, Tom, to the film Gotti, the first film, where the Carlo Gambino character, I think Mark Lawrence played him or something. I think that was his name, where he mentioned like the government can get past loan sharking and gambling, but not drugs, right? And I guess they just didn't want to test it.
Now, why Chicago? I know you're pretty, I'm having Jeff on. He's more the expert on the cartel side of things than I am. Why Chicago? I never, maybe geography, or never understood why Chicago.
So you're saying why Chicago is the
why
main?
Chicago the center of the cartel action? It's like they come through Texas. They got to drive all that way.
I think the end. I mean, you can there's a direct route from Texas to Chicago, which is interesting. But I also just think, all cities are involved with this, right? I mean, you go to Philadelphia today. I mean, I've often said I think most of the murders in Philadelphia are cartel related. They're people that are getting fronted. They're getting a drug sent to them from different cartels. These people have tentacles everywhere. Chicago's just been that big city that has all these high-end groups, these different gangs. Look, you got to get the drugs from somewhere, right? And they're the main starters of all this. They're the ones that get it. They're the connect, right? Whether it's a small guy who reports to someone bigger and then to someone bigger. The start of all this, that begins in Mexico. And it just happens to be that Chicago is in the Midwest. It's an easy way to traffic from Mexico. And then from there, it goes out to all these other places. I mean, I've seen recently in Montana, there is a huge hotbed of activity there in Montana because of the need for drugs, right? And you're starting to see Sinaloa cells pop up and these different groups pop up. It's just that main distribution point.
Okay, so we agree and we establish the Mexicans are smugglers, right? They got them into the U.S. They were good at it. They had the channel set up. They got to Chicago. But they kind of set up camp here as well because they distro to not just 26 cities, to probably about 100 cities. And who do they sell to? I'm not good on the drug supply chain in the U.S. Are they selling to maybe bikers in one area? Are they selling to MS-13 in another? Who do we know the distro points, or does it vary by city, or what does your research tell you there, Jeff?
Well, I don't know if we know, I don't think you could push it down to just like a certain amount of cities, right? But there are, in every city, there are people that are located as traffickers, whether it's gang members, whether it's organizations, groups, as you mentioned, different gangs and stuff, sorts of bikers and things like that. It's all about kind of a supply chain, if you will. You identify, and simple as like, they'll have people. I've heard stories recently. There's a guy on the internet, Johnny Mitchell. You've probably
I love him, by the way. I reached out to get him on the show. I haven't heard back.
He's a good guy. He's a nice guy. You look at someone like him. I mean, people like that. I mean, it's as simple as just meeting someone in a nightclub, right? You ever see the film The Mule?
Yes,
Clint Eastwood.
Clint
Eastwood, yeah. I mean, it's just simple creating networks of just meeting people, right? And you meet people that are in that world, and then you kind of get introduced to someone else, and before you know it, you're dealing with a conduit to someone in a drug cartel. And I'm not talking about the people that we're dealing with here. They're not the high profile people. These are runners. These are people that are based in these cities that are sent there to do these sorts of things. They're just conduits to a bigger and bigger entity. These are huge organizations, right? There's so many tentacles. There's so many different roots of these groups. And again, like I said, I think most of the if you look at a drug organization, let's say 10 people in Rochester, New York, eventually they have a conduit who's a connect to someone else, and then to someone else, and someone else. When we say cartel connected, it's connected, but it's almost like working at a bank, right? I mean, you work at Wells Fargo, but
Correct.
you don't have any connection with the CEO. I mean, it's all just rooted.
Now, you bring a good point structurally, and I know that it's alleged that Pablo actually met with Sicilian mafiosi. He kind of broke bread with them, and really said, "Hey, how were you guys organized?" In Juan Pablo Escobar's book, The Sun, he talked about being a fan of Totorina, how he took on the state. Allegedly, that was part of his influence on taking on the state. So Pablo had some Cosa Nostra influence. How is the cartels structured versus Cosa Nostra, in your opinion?
Well, I think today, it's interesting how it all worked because it's really not at all the same,
Yeah,
right? I mean, I guess they have like the Plaza Boss system, which
yeah,
when I say Plaza Boss, you would think of that as similar like to like the Capo sort of
correct.
thing, where like
You're close. Yeah,
right, it's
yeah,
in the end like
right.
let's for instance talk about the golf cartel, right? The golf cartel is mainly based in Tamaulipas, Nuevo
Yeah,
Leon, those areas where you're having your Monterreys, your Reynolds's, your big cities. Every city has a person that runs it, right? So, Reynosa has a boss. Ciudad Juarez has a boss. Ciudad Victoria has a boss. They all have different bosses. And then underneath them are these people that, run different little factions or cells, right? So in the case of the Sinaloa cartel, there's been no identifiable boss for years. I mean,
yeah,
it could have been El Chapo. It maybe is Mayo Zambada. It may has been this person. So some of these groups don't have general leaders, and there's no making ceremony. There's
correct.
nothing like that.
Honor, yeah.
No. It's similar to like the Camorra, which you and
Correct,
I think I've talked about, where it's more of a
correct.
drug organization where everyone kind of is involved. Where you have now you mentioned the golf cartel, which I'm sure we'll get into Los Zetas. All
Yeah,
of these groups, all these cartels from really the late 90s on created what was called an armed wing, right?
yeah.
So we think of it in Cosa Nostra as enforcers, if
Our
you will.
military, which should listen real quick, Jeff. I'm going to get the tinfoil hat award for this. I said this all along. Cosa Nostra along the way, and I know the government wouldn't allow it. Should have had some type of paramilitary group to enforce enforcement and that kind of stuff.
I was always
Yeah,
I was always fascinated as to why it never happened.
yeah,
Because you look at really the antithesis of two different types of drug cartels, right? In the 70s and 80s,
yeah,
they were these powerful guys with cowboy hats and
yeah,
spurs on. And, if someone got out of line, they dealt with them, right?
correct.
But the whole like decapitation and stuff like that stuff didn't happen until the late 90s, right? So
Yes,
I want to just quickly talk about the golf cartel. Ultimately, Juan Garcia Bregu, the creator of the cartel, was
yeah,
arrested and ultimately extradited to the United States. He's
yes.
serving, I believe, 7 life
Well,
sentences.
they also kind of steal them. Like that was one of the
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's the goal of the United States. Once you extradite somebody, they're done. Their control of anything is over. Because
correct.
in Mexico, they can still control these groups. Once you get extradited, that's that. Game over. So once that happens, as you talked about, there's a power vacuum in the Gulf cartel. There was a guy called Sergio Gomez, who was
Yes,
the likely next person to take power.
yeah,
They called him El Checo.
okay.
He was removed and killed by his best friend,
Ooh,
Asiel Cardenas, who would create this nickname. They called him Matamigo, which was
killed my
friend
friend.
killer,
Yeah,
right? He kills his friend. Cardenas takes over. And Asiel Cardenas, by the end of the 90s, is realizing that I've got the Millennial Cartel to deal with. I got the TO. I got all these different cartels I got to deal with, right? They're trying to come in on my spot here in
correct,
Tamaulipas. Because remember, Tom, southern border, right, in
yeah,
Texas, right? So you're talking about Nuevo Laredo. That is one of the most profitable border points in the drug game, right? So every group wants to come in and take it.
yeah,
So he comes up with this idea and says, you know what? I need an armed wing.
yeah,
So he gives up this amazing idea where he's going to go to members of the military, people that remember
yeah,
in the 80s and 90s were trained by America
yeah.
to
CIA.
fight in different covert wars and
Yep,
different things like that. So he goes to this guy, Arturo Guzman de Sena. They called him Z1,
yep.
right? So DeSena is this military, just official. He's just great. He's this general. He does everything well. He goes to his friends, Heriberto Lascano, people like that, and says, these guys will pay us way more if we go work for them. Because military people in the Mexican army and special forces, they're not making any money, right?
Correct.
So Oscar Cardenas says, I'll pay you way more. Come work for me. You know they're not going to worry about you anyway. Come work for me. We'll be the kings. So he recruits all these military people, and that creates this group called Los Zetas. And Los Zetas
talk about that, because I am, of the cartels, of all of them, Los Zetas fascinate me the most, and I know they kind of migrated over. Continue to set up and kind of their iterations.
Right. So at the time in Laredo, per se, let's say Nueva Laredo, there was a group called Los Chechos. They were the Millennial Cartel. They had Laredo. Eventually, Cardenas takes over Laredo. That's Maya's spot. And he needs to protect his organization.
Yeah.
So you get these people that go from being the cartels up until this point were just, you had groups of sicarios, they would call them. But this was an armed wing where they had the upper hand. Look, you put migrants or people that are in fields with guns against a paramilitary organization, they're always going to win. They're outfitted with more money, more equipment, more weaponry. I mean, you're talking about 50 cal weapons. You're talking about the ability to just get whatever they need. So
and the hand fighting, warfare, going through fields of mud in order, like just a training they got. Have you ever
urban, seen rural, desert, sea, all that kind of warfare? They have the ability to do everything. And we're not talking about privates in the military. We're talking about high-end military people here. And they're contracted to go and remove as many people as possible. Now, ultimately, what would happen here is Cardenas in 2003 would get arrested, and he would ultimately get extradited.
Yeah.
So, as we know, again, power vacuum ensues, right? Now, multiple people, there were two sets of people at this point. It was the old Gulf Cartel people, the old school guys. Then you had this new group who was becoming this kind of golden boy group. They're creating new avenues for drugs. They're creating extortion in cities. They're making a ton of money. So they're kind of saying to themselves,
I believe.
Say that again?
I think they eventually followed the mafia in terms of construction.
They did.
Local rackets. Yeah.
They go into these cities and say, we're going to take your business over. And if you don't give it to us, we're just going to light it up and kill all of you. Right. So there's different sorts of income streams are coming into these groups. And Los Zetas is saying, well, why don't we just create our own group? We don't need these guys anymore. And down the road, that's what happens. Ultimately, the old school Gulf Cartel people get kind of sunned in a way where the Zetas kind of take over power. This guy, Heriberto Lascano, takes over. And that ensues a war. And there would be a decade-long war. And I'm talking about a very brutal and sadistic and depraved war where you have thousands of people that are killed at the border. Now, the Gulf Cartel's dealing with Los Zetas, but they're also dealing with other cartels that are trying to come in and take over. The Zetas are kind of forming factions with, at one point, the Sinaloa cartel, the Gulf Cartel's main enemy. And it just would create vicious cycles. And what we start to see in the 2000s is hanging people from overpasses, decapitation on camera. And in 2005, that's when that started, where you had one video that would be sent to a newspaper in Dallas, Texas, where you have 4 people lined up, Los Zetas, and they're shot on camera or beheaded on camera. And, that stuff is really, you start seeing that kind of stuff rolling around, and that creates a reputation. And Los Zetas were incredibly violent. They were incredibly sadistic. I'm talking about, and I haven't even gotten into a guy, Miguel Trevino Morales, who would ultimately take over Los Zetas, Tom, because eventually Heriberto Lascano would be killed in a gunfight, another power vacuum. By this point, DeSena, Z1's dead, Lascano's dead, everybody's dead. Now, Miguel Trevino is an interesting character. In my estimation, probably the most interesting person in the history of drug cartels. This is a guy who was from Nueva Laredo, spent a lot of time in Texas, a lot of time in America, created some connections, spoke English, had a lot of connections, was very good initially in the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas in creating new routes for these groups. It was very kind of a golden boy, if you will. He ultimately takes control of Los Zetas. And he would rule, Tom, with an iron fist. I'm talking about, Tom, this is the most, in my opinion, and all the people that I've ever looked into, terrorists, this is the most brutal person I've ever looked into. I'm talking about he is responsible for probably tens of thousands of deaths. This is a guy that would, and I've always, Tom, been fascinated by migrants, right? That make the journey from Honduras, southern Mexico, Guatemala, up to the United States, and what they have to kind of deal with to get to this country. And I just want to explain to some people kind of what they deal with. You have to remember, if you have a caravan, right, a big bus, right, these cartels will attempt to get them to come work for them.
Yeah.
And he was known for that, Trevino.
Well, then on top of it, to go across the border, you got to pay them $5K
Absolutely.
and carry something with you.
And that's another thing that he would establish: cartel smuggling, coyote. You know, he would get those kind of things because, again, Nuevo Laredo, these points are big border crossings up into Eagle Pass, which is in Coahuila, or across from Coahuila. But Trevino would do these things where, I'm talking about 2010, 2011. He would hijack or instruct people to hijack these buses.
Yeah.
Walk onto the bus and say, "Listen, every able-bodied man here, you come work for us." Well, we don't want to do that. Okay, well, then you're going to come deal with us. And what they did was, and this actually happened in 2010 and 2011. In 2010, they would take these people to this remote part of Tamaulipas. They would say, "All right, you want to work for us?" "Nope." "Okay, face the wall. And if you deal with our orders, nothing will happen. We'll let you go." Ultimately, all of them will be killed. I think it was 110 or so people. 2011, they did it again, but this time it was more sadistic, Tom. They would make these people fight each other to the death, and the one person that would live would become cartel members. They would rape and pillage the women. It was just an awful scene.
Well, so one of the to tie in, and I want to continue on the cartel stuff. I don't want to go over to the Italian mafia yet, but anybody who knows the history of Roberto Panuzzi was kind of the guy in Colombia because the Italians were tired of overpaying for drugs. They had the Caruana Contreras, they had other brokers, so the Italians were like, Sicilian Cosa Nostra was like, I want to pay less, right? So the Roberto Panuzzi and some other guys, I don't know if they're drug affiliated Cosa Nostra either way, but Italian guys were in South America. And that was kind of the establishment of the European drug trade in Colombia. But when you look at the cartels, the first cartel to pop up on the radar screen within Dragada, and you can Google this, is Los Zetas. So Los Zetas wasn't just, your guy wasn't just a sadistic POS. He was also very smart business-wise. If you could elaborate a little bit on that, you kind of got because once you have the Dragada in Europe, you also get Australia market as well. So give us kind of a little bit of business-wise, if you could break down what are some of the stuff they did.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of these cartels, I mean, Sinaloa did that as well. I mean, these are the making these connections with these transnational groups, whether it's Ndrangheta. Yeah. I mean, that takes your business from, incredible to
billions.
Yeah, right. Billion-dollar groups. And you're right. That's what these people and they're creating these ingenuity money ways, whether it's not just selling drugs, but how can we sell drugs to more people, bigger groups, bigger gangs, bigger organizations, and it's building, right? You start at one level and then you keep going up, moving on up, if you will. But as you talk about too, it's creating other streams. It's smuggling people, sex work, extortion, robbery, car theft, selling stolen goods. I mean, Miguel Trevino Morales was known for that, going into these small border towns and selling a contraband, bags, DVDs, CDs, all any way you could make money. They were creating ways to do that, kind of like the mafia was doing.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm not incredibly familiar with the connection between Los Zetas and Ndrangheta. I'm not that familiar with that. I actually didn't know that. I think I maybe had heard of it at some point, but it doesn't surprise me. I mean, anytime these groups, I know if you look into terrorist organizations, they a lot of the ideas they got were from drug cartels.
Well, it's funny. You and I should collab on this show. I want to do a little more research, but they took Rafael, the Camorra boss. They took the Rafael Imperiale. They stole him from Dubai. They weren't supposed to. It was illegal, but did anyway. and he formed the super cartel with the Kinahans, the
Yeah.
Macro, and the Italians, which had really nothing to do with Ndrangheta, really nothing to do with Cosa Nostra, which showed you kind of the evolution of the drug trade, right? Other Italian groups, Kinahans, and so forth, right? But what I found interesting is his counterpart, Carbone, I think it was Bruno Carbone. They found him in a Syria protected area, which kind of lent itself to one of two things. Either the Camorra was working, and is always believed in the MDMA trade, but with either ISIS and or the Syrian state. So him getting caught, Carbone, wasn't a simple pinch. He was in an ISIS protected area on the Syrian border when he got caught, which opens up a whole new kind of can of worms and discussion. I don't know if you research that yet, but I'm
Well,
pushing
I
that.
think it's interesting because like groups like ISIS, they come across as the freedom fighters that are only fighting for religion, and in the end, they got to create capital and revenue, and they're just as big as criminals as anybody, right? So they're going to look for ways to do that, and they're going to identify people that are good at doing stuff like that, and say, you know what, you're a criminal, we're criminals, let's all work together. Now, you look at, I mean, and it's even governments that are doing this sort of thing. You look into like, and I'm not going to get too deep into it because I know it can hurt channels, but like you look in even Russian governments. I mean, they had people in Syria, they had people in Africa. I mean, all sorts of military companies and things like that are kind of brokering things. Creating, whether it's drug routes or whatever. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, these people are smart in the end, and the goal is to build and create more with your business, and that's exactly what they do with doing things like that.
Did you ever see that one bust in Italy? It was like 81 million pills of MDMA that came from Syria. Obviously, it was from ISIS. Now, what the analysis guys like us said, the Camorra is big. Don't get me wrong, but there's no way that's Camorra money. That's got to be Ndrangheta. That's got to be Cosa Nostra. That's got to be SCU. Like the depth of Italian organized crime. With Syrians, with ISIS, seems to be profound, which is interesting because if you really follow American organized crime, tends to be a little more patriotic, right? In terms of never really deal with terrorism. But let me go back.
Well, that's the thing about the Camorra, right? Because
Yeah,
like the Camorra is not Ndrangheta, right? It's not the Sicilian mafia. It is for the most part fairly regional, right? It's
correct.
Campania, Napoli,
Yeah,
and they run that city, and for them it's all about creating routes, right? Whether it's through Bulgaria or through different areas.
correct.
And I've always looked at the Camorra, and I've told you this before. I look at them as a DTO, a drug trafficking
You were saying,
organization in Italy.
yeah,
But they have an incredibly fertile territory. I mean,
yeah,
you look at the show Gomorrah, La Vella, where in Scampia, that is that's one of the most profitable drug centers in Europe.
$30 million a day or some crazy,
Yeah.
like some crazy.
And for them, that is
Yeah,
all they need.
yeah.
Now, you look at Ndrangheta, that is a worldwide organization. That's huge compared to the Camorra. So we're talking about different levels of criminal.
Well, that's right. Okay, so this is important. Okay, so we'll go back to the Zetas, right? So they obviously changed the game, right? Military style, a rule of the iron fist, vertical integration, partner.
And if you look at today,
yeah,
all these cartels
yeah,
are based off of that model, right?
correct,
So Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion, Sinaloa,
yeah,
Cartel del Noreste, they're all like that now.
correct.
They all have the
Here's
suited
my
and booted
question,
people.
though. Here's my question, though, Jeff. Los Zetas, as it was, is as I understood, what defunct, but it morphed into a newer, fresher organization. Is that correct?
Yeah, so ultimately, people like Miguel Trevino, the sadistic leader, he would be arrested, and he is serving a long sentence in Mexican prison. It actually is quite concerning. He could get out at some point, which is very concerning. Same with Asiel Cardenas. Asiel Cardenas' sentence is about up in this country, and he will eventually have a release date. So the question is, and you look at a lot of these guys, right? Rafael Caro Quintero, who was involved in the murder of a DEA agent,
I
Kiki
know.
Camarena.
Yeah.
He ultimately got out of jail. He was recently just arrested, but these guys go right back to doing what they're doing. But yes, Los Zetas would kind of not go defunct, but they would be led by different people. When Trevino got arrested, his brother Omar Trevino Morales would take over. He got arrested in 2015. And you look at today, The offshoot cartel of Los Zetas is a group called Cartel del Noreste, the Northeast
Yes,
cartel.
yes, you were saying over tech. Yes.
And it's weird. It's funny because the leader up until last year was a guy called Juan Trevino, who is the nephew of
Oh,
Miguel. He was arrested. And now
interesting.
they're kind of a splinter group that isn't run by anyone in particular. But if you see some of the videos coming out of Mexico quite recently, those are Cartel del Noreste Sicarios fighting with the Mexican army. Now, there's also a group called the Old School Zetas who are
Okay.
around as well. They're kind of the old school people. They're still trying to grab power as well.
Interesting.
And they've kind of taken over. And it's interesting because CDN, Cartel del Noreste, there was a lot of stuff that came out in the Guacamaya leaks, which was a group in Mexico. Think of them like Anonymous.
Yeah.
They hack systems.
Yeah.
They're a hacking group
Yeah, they have an arm of hackers. Yeah.
yeah, and they essentially hacked government websites and unhacked all this information. And that leak would actually tell us that, according to the government, Cartel del Noreste is one of the leading cartels in the northeast of Mexico. And they have people in Veracruz, San Luis Potosi, all these different places. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that governments, i.e., the governors of places like Veracruz, are allowing entry of CDN into these places. All this stuff couldn't happen without the government. Very simple. The government is on the take in Mexico. All the police, the government, the mayors of these places. You look at a lot of these cartel videos that you'll see come out.
Yeah.
They will address police chiefs, government people.
Yeah.
Of you're giving information to this cartel and to this cartel. And we've seen these cartels just evolve. I mean, you look at like Sinaloa. They've got people in Chiapas. They have people in all the southern state. I'm just people
now in Spain and also might be setting shop in Italy as well. So they're going
They're
the
everywhere.
model that they did in but what's funny is they got caught in Spain because they were flaunting their wealth. Yeah, moved there, buying 20 luxury cars, Lambos and so forth. So they were kind of like a little stunad in terms of how they operated. But it's documented, that Sinaloa is putting boots on the ground in Europe and other areas, which is crazy.
Yeah, they're putting them everywhere. And it's really just about they're still fighting over Mexico, right? Because there's all these different places. I mean, you look at kind of the evolution, Tom, of violence in Mexico, right? For instance, Guanajuato. Guanajuato was probably 10 years ago, one of the safest states in Mexico. It was lush. Michoacan as well at one point. Michoacan is, I don't know if you know this, Tom, is the leading producer of avocados in the world.
Yeah, actually.
Right? So these places at one point were rural agricultural gems, right? They were beautiful. Guanajuato. But then we started to realize how important Guanajuato is to the region of Mexico. If you look at where Guanajuato is on the map, it is the border state, or it's the state between a border state and then the ocean. So it's incredibly important to getting into Texas. So these cartels are fighting over Guanajuato, and you'll see these regional cartels pop up.
Correct.
These little groups, maybe, for instance, there was a cartel run by this guy called El Maro in Guanajuato. And what you start seeing is bigger cartels fighting these smaller cartels over turf. We need this because this is incredibly important to trafficking drugs through your state to get to the border. So they're still fighting. These places, Arizona's border with Sonora, you see all these places, they're all fighting each other.
Well, but so when you kind of break that, I don't want to split off too much, but I want to talk about El Mayo for a second. The belief that El Mayo is a boss, at least at the Sinaloa, right, was even more powerful and bigger than El Chapo. So basically, El Chapo did the interview with Sean Penn. He started, being a junior version of Gotti, where he started like maybe popping up as public as he could. I think El Mayo got sick of it. I think that's how they caught him, right? But what I found interesting is when they went to get El Chapo's son, the government, they called El Mayo up, and at first he didn't want to help, but then he gave the green light. And then all of a sudden, an army showed up, battled and chased the police away, and they let El Chapo's son go. So it's kind of conflicting, where it's like they feel like El Mayo screwed El Chapo, but saved his son. What do you land on that? That fascinates me.
I'm just going to tell you something that anyone that looks into this stuff will tell you and knows very, very, very
Yeah.
openly.
Yeah.
El Mayo is the biggest asset this country has in
Oh,
Mexico.
that's another
He's a
discussion.
CIA, he's a rat. I mean, everybody knows it. I mean, yeah, he is. I mean, it's widely known. I mean, his own son testified in the El Chapo
Correct,
case.
correct. Well, he told them. So they spoke. Well, I don't know how they spoke, but they spoke, and he basically gave him the green light to do it, which is weird. Probably because he had to, because he partnered with the CIA. But that's another discussion.
Tom, look at this. For instance, this guy's been in the drug game since the 70s. It's
Correct.
the biggest drug, one of the biggest drug
It's like
tribes in
one
Mexican
picture
history.
of him, like one.
He's never been arrested.
Yeah.
Never spent a day in jail. I mean, you're talking about organizations that have went through 5, 6, 7 leaders. They're spending 7 life sentences in American prisons. This guy's never seen a jail cell.
Jesus.
He is, and you also look at the fact of even if he wasn't right. Let's say he was not an asset.
Yeah.
Getting to him is so incredibly difficult,
He
right?
has 7 rings of
Yes,
security.
they insulate these
So if
people
you
so
like
highly.
go past the first ring, he has like 8 hours to escape.
That's why El Chapo Guzman, I mean, you have to wonder about his, I'm not talking about his mental state, but he just got obsessed with wanting to be famous, man. Like he could have just lived his life, not worried about anything, and had this 8-ring group around him where you don't ever get to him. He's getting Sean Penn to come see him. He's gotten on camera doing interviews.
Hopefully dating like a novella actress or whatever.
Right. But again, if you look at El Chapo, he was a scapegoat for people like El Mayo Zambada. And look, El Chapo had his own problems with people like the Beltran Leyva organizations. After, a lot of people believe he gave up information on the Beltran Leyva brothers, which led to one of the deaths of one of them. And, you have to look at the antithesis of those guys. Chapo and the Beltran Leivas had been, I mean, they're said to be cousins. They had been close since they were young. They're all from Sinaloa, these remote towns in Sinaloa, and they came up in the game together. And down the road, you see what this game can do to them. They were splintered. You start having people talking about other people to the government.
Correct.
It's interesting to me. Mayo is very interesting because, again, he's never been arrested. We can all put 2 and 2 together. Everyone pretty much knows that at this point.
Yeah.
He's what, 75 years old? He'll die in a couple of years. His family will take over. Everybody will be good.
Now there was a guy that escapes me. The guy who pinched Louisi for the FBI through Previty, the FBI guy, Irish guy. Somebody, I'm talking about. He was on Value Entertainment.
Michael McGowan?
Yeah, that's it.
He wrote a book. Very good.
Yeah, I got to check out. You never interviewed him, right?
I have not. I've read his book. I actually have his book on one of my books.
I don't know if he covers this in the book, but he went undercover as a Sicilian mafiosi and through El Chapo. And what I found interesting is, first of all, they didn't really check his credentials. I don't know how you would, but they didn't check. So they assumed he was a Sicilian mafioso, spoke to him in English, not even Italian, but whatever. They had him as a Sicilian mafioso, right? And El Chapo in passing, almost like you asked me for a favor or I asked you for a favor. Hey, can you get me Mike on the show? Like a small favor. El Chapo was like, hey, Mike, or whatever his name was for Sicilian Undercover. Can you just wash like about 500 million for us? We need it soon. We'll pay our 8 points or whatever we pay. We know you guys know how to do that. We have some extra. It was like extra money lying around that was like as if like you asked me for $100. It was like that minuscule and not that big of a deal to try to wash an extra 500 million cash. I thought that was fucking insane. So that goes to show you how much money there must be behind their organizations,
And I think that's the thing about these cartels. I mean, there's so much involvement, which is even when you make the money, you're creating the network of accountants and shell company owners and people below you, right, that have to wash the money and take care of the money. Because, again, you'll be fine. You could buy whatever you want, but it's about getting the money that you're making, the huge amounts of money, and saying, well, how do we make this legitimate money? And now you look at now you look at like the crypto business, right? I think one of the most interesting stories in the drug war that we've had, right, is, and this has nothing to do with cartels, is the evolution of Silk Road, which is Ross Ulbricht, right?
Yep.
he creates this marketplace where he essentially puts small end drug
Yep.
dealers into people that want to buy it
That's
through the
right.
internet. And he
Democratized
creates
drug
this,
dealing.
yeah, he creates this thing where you can go on the internet and buy drugs like you would on Amazon. And
Yeah.
you get the drugs in the mail. It's perfect.
Yeah.
You look at how he got caught. Too worried about putting his name out there. Gets on the, and eventually big things get caught up. But, these ingenuity, these ways to move drugs, I mean, it goes to all these different levels. But I do want to say one thing on just like people like Michael McGowan and how you're willing to do business with people. You look at El Chapo, right? He was doing business with those guys, the Flores twins,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Out
The
of
shop.
Chicago.
Yeah.
Now, you know what they do today?
They're out. They're making a movie with 50 Cent.
Yeah, they have a podcast with 50 Cent. Like they're telling the whole story. And it's like, but you have to realize these are guys that built up things with Chapo. They became trusted emissaries, trusted connects.
Yep.
And down the road, that's why these people will never last, because eventually you're going to get in situations where it doesn't matter if these are family, these are brothers, whatever. Eventually involving too many people is going to bring you down. And El Chapo was way too direct with dealing with way too many people, willing to talk to people, dealing with people that doesn't really know that well. You look at the mafia, they thrived for so many years because of secrecy. They didn't just deal with anybody.
Correct.
If somebody walked up and said, "Hey, I can make you a ton of money loan sharking." Who the hell are you? Get out of here.
Yeah.
And
that's the beginning of the end. I would like to do another one because I'm working on a piece, and it talks a little bit about how the Indragada. Remember, if you have a $70 billion organization, even at the wholesale level, you're probably shifting around $5 to $10 billion globally to buy your drugs, etc. So I kind of found out that what Indragada was doing with the cartels. I don't know which cartel. I'm still trying to find out. They're buying their drugs through Bitcoin and another coin called Monero, Menro. And you can tell because when it's utilized, it spikes up, and then when they, just the swings are inconsistent with a regular market. It's with, hey, I'm going to sell you the drugs in Monero, and then I'm going to buy the drugs in Monero. Oh, you know what? I want to get some of it in cash. Let me go ahead and pull it. And what's crazy is they pull it out into shell companies upon shell companies and put it into legitimate enterprise, which has never been done before. And then allegedly, these wallets can't be uncovered because of the secrecy and the crypto and that kind of stuff. And even if they are, they shut down one wallet and they open up another. So you're 100% on crypto has changed the game for the drug business and the drug cartels. I mean, it's you no longer think about it, right? There's an expression: cocaine moves fast, money moves slow. So to get cocaine across the borders easily, to get that money back is not. Have you done any research or any? They did a show on the HSBC scandal with the cartels. Are you familiar with that?
I know about it. I'm not that familiar with it, but when you discuss, that's really, we always say with whether it's the feds or whoever, they always say follow the money, right? That's how you look at like Joe Messino. That's how Joe Messino was brought down. They followed IRS agents followed some of the people he was dealing with, and that's how a lot of the Al Capone, right? But like the cryptocurrency market, I think will only make this more difficult. I mean, they can't deal with it now. Listen, Tom, the truth is, they can't and don't care about this. Okay, the government could shut this down pretty quickly, right?
Like
they could go to Mexico and cut it out. They make too much money off it because it all again domino effect down, right? Because the drug war in our country incredibly profitable, Tom.
Yeah.
So but yeah, crypto make it very difficult. Very
difficult.
So
we're going to wrap up soon. Drop your comments below. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what Jeff was saying about the Gulf Cartel, the Zetas, and so forth. Before we wrap up, Jeff, I wanted to touch base with you. We mean to reach out. How did you feel about your Sammy interview? Where did it go well? Where did you maybe feel like you wanted a little more depth? I thought it was a great interview, but I wanted to touch base with you.
Well, I think, Tom, as you know, I mean, you spoke to Sam, and I think I've said before, I think you did a really good job with him because it's very hard at this point to do an interview with him where, look, he is very good at putting himself out there, and he has changed the game, him and Franzese on that, right?
Correct.
I guess for me, and a lot of people on YouTube didn't quite get it, but the goal for me was now I'm at Barstool, right? So there are a lot of people that don't know that much about Sammy Gravano, right?
Correct.
And the interview more or less for
Oh,
me was
especially the bar store. Like, real quick, I was thinking about that because my interview scope, for those that are watching, Jeff knows this. I'm a business guy. He was running a $500 million organization. Would have been in the Fortune 500 if it was legal. I wanted to see how the machinations work. Jeff introduced, believe it or not, Sammy to a whole new audience who, believe it or not, may know who he is, but know nothing about. I just wanted to set that up for you, Jeff.
when that's kind of for me, like a lot of people don't understand like things that we do,
Yeah.
but there's a method to the madness, right? So with
Correct.
Sammy, my goal was you can't just go into these, and a lot of these people on YouTube think you can just go in and he'll just answer whatever you want, and you can make him look. Look, at the end of the day, I'm not there to make the guy look stupid. I'm there to ask him questions that I find interesting. You know, I thought there were questions that I asked that I didn't really know. I never knew he possibly tried to kill Joe Gallo. I never knew that. Now, again, it wasn't necessarily. I know most of the people on YouTube have seen Sammy interviews, but there are a lot of people that haven't, right?
Yeah.
And that was the goal for me with it. It was tough. I think there were questions that I would like to have asked.
Yeah.
But you only have so much time. You only have so much you can go into, and
Correct.
I did what I could. I did my best with
Yeah,
it.
but Jeff, he gave you, I know, kind of like the background. He gave you a lot more time than normal. He answered his questions a little more openly with you than other people. He had a great rapport. Listen, guy, like I would see the comments. First of all, and again, I'm going to, not that you need me to stick up for you, but as a podcaster, right? Jeff and I are not these hardcore journalists. Like, I got you, right? We're podcasters, which is a little different. We're trying to get their story out, right? So if Jeff said he hated, not that you did, but let's say Jeff hated him a year before the interview.
But Tom, here, let me say something.
Go ahead.
My personal opinion of any of these people is not relevant. Okay,
That's
I
what I
don't
was
like
trying
or
to get at.
dislike Sammy.
Correct.
I don't like or dislike him, but the truth of the matter is, he is an incredibly important part of Mafia history. Okay, and whether I like him or not, I don't need to go into an interview and say, "Oh, he's this, he's that." People have their opinion of him already, and that's up to them. My job is not to carry the water for him. My job is to tell his story, and I think we did that. And as far as personal opinions, there are some people that I like Sammy. I told his people I thought he was very likable. Like, I thought he would be kind of, he's older. I thought he'd be a little more standoffish. He was really likable. I've talked about openly. Frank Fiordolino is one of the nicest people I've ever talked to.
Yeah, Frank's good.
Right? Some of these people are likable, and I can understand why people have in fact, I don't know if I've ever met any of these people that I didn't like. But it's not about my favoritism or whether I like them or not. It's just about telling the story. And
to be fully candid, like, you were on a much bigger platform. People got to understand, like, for the Barstool guy, wow, that's Sammy the Bull. I knew, John Gotti or whatever he is. Hey, Jesse, Happy New Year to you. Happy that you're
that's
here.
the thing. It's about finding audiences that maybe don't know him, trying to tell some story, maybe some new things as well. And, really just kind of adding it to the catalog of people that I've spoken to.
Let me ask you this, because this is crazy given the length of the interview. I think it was a 2.5 long interview, whatever it was, right? So it was a long form interview. As crazy as this sounds, here's my feedback, and this is positive. It was a long form interview, a Joe Rogan type interview. I left even somewhat dissatisfied because I wanted more, and that's crazy for a 2.5 hour interview. Normally,
there were multiple questions that I wanted, like, there were certain things I knew he was not going to get into, and I tried, I asked. And again, I think if you know Sammy Gravano, there are things that I don't have to say right now that he has not talked about that I wanted to ask him about.
That's correct.
But I also related it to, like, you spoke to him. I spoke to John Gleason, right?
Yeah.
And I thought the most important question that I wanted to ask him, he answered pretty succinctly, was, why do you do deals with people like this?
Yeah.
right? Well, how can you justify that and say,
Correct.
we're going to allow these people on the street? And he gave me a good answer. And I wanted to kind of build off of just kind of trying to get some questions in that I knew he'd maybe get into, or maybe he would, answer. But there were things that I just knew he wasn't going to answer. And I'm not, so what am I going to ask him? Oh, I'm not going to talk about that. Well, then I wasted my
Well,
time.
let me ask you this. One of the areas of controversy. So I interviewed Sammy first. I think it was in January, and then I interviewed Gleason. I got Gleason after you were on his first round. Congratulations on that. I got him afterwards. But one of the places that wasn't aligned was Gleason said he flipped because he thought Gotti was going to kill him, but Sammy said he's flipped because he was going to throw him under the bus and make him take the rap. Where do you land on that?
Well, I see that's another thing, and I think that's a problem with some of the content that Sammy has put out. If
Yeah,
you go back and watch, I've talked to other creators about this. You watch the Diane Sawyer interview.
correct,
His reasons then were way different than the reasons now. And I
correct.
think that's some of the questions that I would have as to how does your story change multiple times.
Yeah,
Listen, and I'm not afraid to say this. Okay,
yeah,
I'm very open with these people.
yeah,
The reason people cooperate, it's
yeah,
very simple, Tom.
yeah,
They don't want to go to jail. Now, we can make the excuse as to why you did it all you want. That's the reason.
correct.
You didn't want to go to jail. And
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that. I
no,
wouldn't want to either.
right,
Right. But just admit to it. There's people that, did the same things you did and didn't cooperate. I just
right.
feel like, to me, if you're going to get into that world, you're going to get dirty and you got to pay with your life. And that's how it goes. And
Yeah.
yeah, I would have liked to have asked him stuff like that. There are some other controversial things, which,
Well,
we
the,
don't.
oth- the, other, the other thing is you were openly critical on this show because it's funny. We did. I have George who's in the audience. He does our clips, right? And we did so many shows that one of the clips you were pretty critical on, and you kind of felt for a minute, or maybe you still may, that he might have been behind the Chico hit, and I think you kind of asked him about that. Where do you land on that now?
Well, see, I think it's interesting because that was one of the things that I was very curious about, because I've heard the Georgie DeChico stuff, right? Where
Correct.
George is sitting there saying, I think he was a part, this and that. But I slowly realized how truly deep the friendship was between those two.
Correct.
I mean, Sammy Gravano looked at him as almost as a brother, right?
Brother, mentor, yeah.
And then he talked, and we kind of already knew this, but we
Yeah.
look at kind of the level of gangster that DeChico was, the one that was talking on Fox 5. He's this low-level guy. Let's just be honest, he's a water carrier for John Gotti. He's a
Yeah.
lapdog,
I don't
right?
think Butter was ever made either. I'm pretty sure he wasn't.
No, he wasn't. And he wasn't made because of something that he did in the past. And Sammy wouldn't get into what that was, but he was very he mentioned to me he'd love to dig him up and shoot him again. He was very open about that. But
Yeah.
I was really curious about that because I think you have to wonder. I mean, with the past with Sammy, it's not a secret that he killed multiple people that he was close to and friends with, right? For business opportunities. And I don't think it's that hard to believe. But then when you start to realize kind of that DeChico was this kind of hanger on, he was at trial every day, similar to like your Jackie Noses. Jackie Nose was not an earner. He was not a good gangster. He was just a lapdog for John Gotti. And you see these hanger-ons. Peter Gotti, he's another one. They were all hangers-on to the brother or their guy. So I don't. I'm now a lot more into that. I understand now.
What did you learn about Sammy that after the interview you surprised that you learned, or just holy shit, I didn't know that? Whether you asked them or you chit chat with him offline before and after, or with his people. But what did you learn about Sammy after the interview that surprised you?
Well, I remember I think I told my father this because him and I were talking about it, and he told me that he thought it was wild. And I said, I can understand how he became what he became.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
He goes from being this just a kind of a guy that plays by the rules to this high-end guy making all this money and has all this power.
Yep.
Because in the simple, I spoke to him on the phone, like in the interview and off the air, maybe 3 hours total.
Yeah.
And I found myself like just almost in all of like how he was able to just say this and say that. And
Yeah,
he's very, I wouldn't say manipulative because that's not the right word. He
yeah,
was very like, I don't even know the word. He almost seemed likable, right?
it sounds in a way, and us being what we do, it could almost, as weird as it's going to sound, charming in a way because it's like,
Yeah, sure.
it's like, wow, I'm talking to Sammy the Bull, and it's like this guy. Here's the thing, right? And you said it best, you encapsulated it. Not friends with the guy, you weren't carrying his water. The other part people got to understand too, it's called being a guest, right? Do you have a guest in your house? When Jeff, you're going to come over sometime, have a cigar, a nice
Sure.
meal. What about if Jeff walks in and I start making fun of him or start making fun of
Littling him, right.
be like, thanks for you take the cigar and shove it up your ass, right? That's what happens in the podcasting world. And the other part is, I think you're a fair guy. I always said this: if somebody has something to contradict what he says, they're welcome to come on or welcome to. I'll report on it, right?
I also think, Tom, and this is just my opinion, okay? And I didn't look at Sammy as like, I truly just wanted to speak to him because I think it's fascinating. You know, views are great, but like I really just wanted to do it. And my goal ultimately was I would have loved to have spoken to him in person and try
Yeah,
to ask him some of those things, maybe
yeah,
a deeper thing, right? But you know, you're right. You're not going to you can't just go into an interview. And all these people, I mean, they all say what they would do, but it's when you try to get the people that you're getting on, you have to be respectable. And
yeah,
it's like, you're right,
yeah,
bringing them into your home. Like, I'm
yeah,
just not going to just call you out and start saying shit to you. Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? You
yeah.
know, you
Now,
got to build a little bit. And
for my interview, although I had a different angle, I found like we both done pretty high profile interviews, right? And this, the higher people got to understand, it's a higher profile you go, there's more barriers to entry. You might have submit the questions before, they might have to get approved. Oh, my daughter's screaming out, and I'll mute this. Yikes. My question is, were you happy or were you unhappy with the parameters and the structure of the interview?
well, look, I mean, I would love to, kind of go into something where there is no holds barred. You can ask whatever you want, obviously on the basis of you can't make shit up and stuff, but like, stuff where you can go in and just ask whatever. And the only person that I've had that happen with is, people like Frank who
Yeah,
are very open to, Chad Marks. I've had him on.
that's
He's
actually
always been very open with his
yeah,
life and what
yeah,
he's done. And, I get there are people that don't want to go down the road of certain things again. It's difficult for them or whatever. But again, I think if you are going to be someone that commits a murder and you openly do it,
correct.
you should talk about it. I
Yeah,
mean, that's just part of what you did. You did it, not
yeah.
me. You did it.
Well, the other part is with the range of questioning, I found him to be very flexible. Like again, I was like, wow, I would have asked that if I would have known. I certain things I just didn't ask, but I felt like he gave you a little more flexibility. My only like for him personally is, he's kind of done a lot of interviews and he's very at this point a media personality. Hence, he's media trained. So I felt like some of the answers he gave were like like the stock answer. But luckily, you had the long form interview to tease out the good stuff, and that's why I thought it worked.
And I thought, I mean, to me, like there was one part of the interview where he literally talked about in about a 3 or 4 minute spot where
Yeah,
how the hit on Paul happened,
yeah,
and what happened, how did it get started, who was involved directly, who knew what, and that stuff to me was fascinating to learn. I would have loved to have asked him certain things, but in the end, I don't know, maybe I'll speak to him against them. I don't know, but in the end, I was happy with it. It did what I wanted it to do. Again,
correct.
I'm trying to get a well-rounded show where other people can listen, not just people that know a ton about Sammy Gravano. And that's
Sure.
my channel. I'm trying to not only, have some of the normal stuff that we've heard about, but I do want to talk about people that not a lot of people talk about. I've done shows on Frankie Lacasio and, Tommy Giuelli and all these different guys.
Yeah.
Those are the guys that are interesting to me, but you have to do it all. It's a well-rounded thing.
Well, I think I told you this. I'm streaming through there as well, Mobsters Inc. So what happened was I acquired a channel around 30,000 subs. I'm still soft launching. I'm figuring out how to angle it, this and armchair. But what I did was prior when I first got the channel, like the first day, or I had access to it before I sent the money over. I said to the Mobsters Inc. guys, I said, "Who's your favorite mob podcaster? Is it Armchair NBA? Is it Jeff Nadu? Is it RJ Reynolds? And is it who the hell are these guys? Right. And 67% said, who the hell are these guys? You got like 15%. RJ got like 10%. And I was like dead last. I'm like, oops, they're not going to be too happy with me taking over the channel. But I realized that, and you'll appreciate this, that there's a fuck ton of people who have no clue who we are. No clue.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like a drug cartel or like a mafia, there are levels of the way you do things, right? And right now the big boys in this are, you know, outside of like mobsters, it's the long time guys, Capisci, George Anastasia, none of which have YouTube channels, right?
Correct.
So we're going into other things, right? We're going into other methods of and then you have like the Scott Bernsteins of the world and people like that. So I think there's another generation coming up trying to tell these same stories. And my goal is when I write something, so for instance, when I write a blog on Barstool about Cartel del Noreste, I'm teaching people stuff that don't know this kind of shit.
Correct.
So it's just about growing my name and becoming the next in line to do this thing.
Well, I had you familiar with Ed Scarpo over at Cosa Nostra News?
Say that again.
Ed Scarpo over at
absolutely. He's another one.
So I'm pretty friendly with him. We chat a little bit, we share ideas and stories. And I was like, and I'm not knocking Capisci, even though he knocked me, but not knocking Capisci, but like, that's the old guard, the blogs and that kind of stuff. And the newer people, I feel personally, are yourself, RJ Roger, obviously OC Shorts. So I feel like there's a new generation and it's new and exciting. But you're kind of doing similar to what I'm doing. Is we're mixing it up a little bit. I don't think you could live on Cosa Nostra alone. I don't think there's enough there. I just don't personally.
That's the funny thing, and I've talked about this before. Like I'm at the end of my road with mob content, right? I feel like I've done enough with it. It's time to mix in other things, whether it's cartels, whether it's rappers and racketeering trials, whether it's serial killers, Ponzi schemers, whatever. You have to be more based into other things because you're right. There is only so much you can do in the mob genre, and the truth is, as you talked about, there's really only a small portion that's actually interesting because I've done shows on, Vito Genovese or Frank Costello and they don't get watched, right?
Correct.
I could do a video on the mafia in Dallas, but only certain people watch it. Like there's only a certain amount of videos in this genre you can do that people want to watch, right? And it's relating to Gotti or Joey Messino or Vincent Gigante. So, and by the way, someone's asking about, we're talking about Joe Butterass, DeChico. Which I didn't think we'd have to actually say. Maybe I said George. My apologies. Joe.
Yeah. Correct. So and Jeff does cover some Kimura topics. I've done a show on Lastida. I've interviewed Salvo Arena, and also Sacro Cordon Unita, and I did some Dragata shows. On Mobsters Inc., you should check her out. Anna Sergi, she's like the worldwide thought leader. Her and Antonio Nicasso of the Indragata. They're both like from Calabria. They're both thought leaders. She's in the UK. He's in Canada, and they're just. But I'll give you an example. Out of all the people I've interviewed, I've been very fortunate. Antonio Nicasso is probably arguably the most important person relative to the real world who I interviewed. It probably got 3,000 views.
And that's the thing. Like someone saying, do stuff on the mob in Italy. I've done. I'm going to do a video and I'm at the point now where for me, I'm just looking to grow my genre and look, there are certain videos I'm going to do. I did a video recently on Los Zetas. It got like 7,000-8,000 views, but to me, I'm trying to build into other genres. I'm doing a video very soon I'm going to do the real characters behind Gomorrah, right? Because they're all based on real people.
That's after Delaros, right?
Delaros, yes, correct. Yeah. And like that stuff, I'm going to do some videos on some rappers and stuff.
By the way, Cosmo got killed. You were a little skeptical. Cosmo got killed.
I don't know what it would serve by killing him, to be honest. He's already in a very difficult situation, but you're probably right. I mean, the government kills a lot of people they don't like. So, and that happens everywhere, not just here.
Good point. So Jeff, I know people know the channel, but on the rerun, let us know what you got cooking for the channel. You like expanding it a little bit and give and plug it a little bit, and also iTunes as well.
Yeah, I got some big shows coming up. I got a show I'm going to be doing on Ross Ulbrecht and Silk Road. I've got A.R. Rab coming up, which is a rapper out of Philadelphia, probably one of the most wasted talents ever in the rap game due to the fact he did not want to leave the streets behind, and he's now serving 45 years in federal prison. Going to do some stuff on serial killers and cartels, and just really kind of expand the channel. And also, some stuff in Italy and things like that. So check me out. The Sit Down, it's on YouTube. You can also find it on iTunes as well. That's where I really get into all sorts of things. We had a video recently. We talked about the Idaho murders.
Yeah.
Just really interesting crime content that people like. I feel like I have a good grasp of a lot of this information. And it's, again, about, being the next guard and doing all this stuff. So
let me ask you for some professional advice. I'll have a mob video and it'll do great, north of 20,000 subs. I like the business end. I did a show on FTX. Now, granted, the algorithm destroyed it, but when I do my business shows, I love doing them, but the numbers are abysmal. What advice do you have there?
RJ and I talk about this stuff all the time,
yeah,
right? Like getting into other things. And I think one of the things that we do as creators is so for instance, there was a time between, let's just say, March of 2022 and August, where every video I put out, 40, 50, 60,000 views, and it was killing it. It was all mob content.
Correct.
And then I'm thinking like, all right, well, now I want to do something else, right?
Yeah.
So I remember I did a video on this guy, Maurice Phillips. He was this drug dealer from New Jersey. He was the basis of Stringer Bell in The Wire. If you looked at him, he was an educated guy. And I thought, this is so interesting. This is awesome. Yeah. It's going to kill it. I think to this day, it doesn't have 5,000 views. Jesus. But what I immediately did, Tom, is I saw it and I said, damn, that's not what I want. And I'm going to get out of that genre and go do something else. Yeah. We talk about this. Like, you have to continue to do it, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if you're doing stuff on FTX, continuing to build, show people that, maybe it'll start 3,000 views. And then the next you're getting 7,000 views or whatever. You have to stick in it. And that's what I'm going to start doing. To me, it's not about views necessarily. I want to just break into talking about everything, right?
What's this kind of the truth is, like, it's so weird because I don't, I don't get involved in the drama, but the truth is, a friend of the show here, but he's kind of get on you a little bit. The truth, Jeff is a guest. We just talked about
I don't entertain these types of people. Listen, I don't need to explain why I do anything. I've dealt with trolls for decades. I've been dealing with them at bars. So I don't even entertain them. I just get rid of them.
How's things going over at Barstool for you?
Very good. I've been there 2 different times. This is my second time around. And I've gotten a lot of attaboys recently. Weirdly enough, Tom, I mean, there's so many things that I do that this world will never see. I mean, I think one of the big things that I've done recently is I've started going viral with just the most random things that I'm doing. So, I've been proud. I mean, Portnoy's definitely, said he's talked about me multiple times. So I'm happy with that. And, I'm really just trying to build a triumvirate of things that I do and show that I'm profitable with what I'm doing.
Well, so I'm sure you saw this, but I followed Portnoy on IG. And I guess, I don't know if Rico's back. I don't even know. But Rico got let go or quit. And he goes, one door closes, one opens, and it's Jeff Nadu's head coming out of the bullpen.
Well, it's funny because when that happened, it was around like the first week of December. He actually, when Rico quit that day, Dave sent a company-wide email to everyone in content. And it was, obviously when you leave Barstool and go to a competitor, we don't discuss them, right? And at the end of the email, it just says, Nadu crew rise up. And it became this thing. And weirdly enough, within a week, Rico has come back to Barstool and we kind of had a peace treaty. We kind of buried the hatchet.
Really? Can you send me that link?
Yeah, the video did like 3 million views, I think. It was pretty
well.
Wild.
You know what? I don't know if I ever told this because I don't get in the middle of things. A good friend of mine, he's in the fantasy league. Fun A?
Fun Anthony.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine. and he's close with Rico.
He
So
actually told Rico multiple times you should do content with Nadu because he's funny.
well,
So I know Fun Anthony. He's a DJ's guy.
yeah. And I don't want to say too much as a private guy, but I
Yeah.
just asked him because I'm friendly, I'm friendly with you, we're friends. And I said, hey, I'm pretty friendly with Nadu. I kind of like Nadu. Like behind the scene, you know how there's like YouTube and like
Yes,
media,
sure.
then there's real life, you know?
Yeah.
And I said, I'm not saying just perfect, but likable guy. Why doesn't Rico like him? I don't think he even knows.
Nobody really did, and it's funny because we did this last week.
Yeah.
I went up there, and the thought was we were going to speak, and we were in a room. We spoke for about a half an hour, and he has his own things that he's dealing with. I don't know if we ever really figured out why. I don't really care though. For me, it's just about moving on, trying to be able to do. Because I think him and I would be very good together.
Any chance for Men of Honor podcast? I was like, fucking.
Oh, there's definitely going to be a chance, and I think if we can do it, we're going to do it. And I try to convey to him that to me, it's not always about money. To me, it's about how can we become the best employees at this company, And at the end of the year, I want Dave Portner to say, I'm really happy with what he's been able to do, or I'm happy with what Rico's been able to do. And I think together we're more helpful together than we are separate.
Well, I remember the one show. Portnoy was like, listen, I know you don't like Jeff, but you guys do Man of Honor. He was joking around, Dave, but he goes, Jeff will be in a box. He'll have a voiceover. He will not be seen. Like every possible, like he was still like, no.
Well, I think the problem with Rico is he got to a point where he started doing some things, and it's pretty widely known. I mean, he was actively trying to contact family members of people, and it just, it wasn't good. It got really bad, and he got kind of into a corner where, he needed to make good with a lot of the things that he's done. And one of that was making good with me. And look, I don't know if it's genuine from him.
I'm happy about that. I'm happy.
Yeah, I don't know if it's genuine with him, but it's welcomed, and whether it is or not,
you had the what is it called? The higher meeting or whatever that was. It was Big Cat.
The higher court. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were talking about Rico. And again, whatever's public, because it was public. I just didn't have the time to check it out. He did something out of pocket to somebody specifically, not to you.
It wasn't me. So it actually has to do with me, though. Okay. I don't know if you know this, but on Cyber Monday, we have an event every year at Barstool where we sell merch and we do this fun event. And this year, the thing was, for every $1,000 of merch we sold, or tens of thousands of dollars, you were able to kick the ball on a goalie chosen by Portnoy. It was a World Cup theme.
I remember that. Yeah.
Him and I were partnered up where he got to shoot on me, and he made the shot. Right.
I remember that.
Right before the goal, one of our coworkers mentioned his government name on camera.
Oh.
And he went through the roof and contacted the wife of this individual through a burner account.
That's not cool.
Which it's widely known this happened. And he got called out for it. They found out it was him, and it transformed into this.
I don't think he's as good on that line of what's media and what's real life.
I think he needs to, and I told him this when I spoke to him. The one thing I'll say is I told him, you got to start just not letting this shit bother you, man. Because we related to this. I mean, some of the people in this chat right now, their goal is for me to mention their name and talk about them. I don't care about them. I will get up from this interview when we're done, go have a nice lunch, go work out later, and live my life. I don't care about these people.
Correct.
You can say whatever. You can tell me I'm coming to your door right now with 10 guns. Come. I don't care. I don't worry about this shit.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just, I told him, you got to stop worrying and letting these people see you bothered by it, because that's why they keep doing it.
Now, I've been busy with kids and real life, and I'm getting back to doing shows. And I'm talking in general. It's more like the business side of things. It seems like MobTube in general, and I use that. I know FBS coined that term, but in general, the whole swath of people.
Yeah,
I kind of feel like it ran its course. I kind of feel like it's, and I'm not knocking anybody individually. I don't want to have a whole show about me, but as a group of 15 some odd people, right, tangentially involved with that. I think as a genre and subjects, it seems like it kind of ran its course. Where do you land on that?
It's funny you say that. I was having we were speaking about that last night. I was on a phone call with someone, and it definitely seems like it's getting to the end, right? these channels are starting to talk about other things. There's still fights, and you start to notice that in the end, all these people end up hating each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's dead. I think it's something where the people that are in it are starting to realize that they made a vicious mistake by not having something else to fall back on.
Yeah.
And the goal now is to try to get whatever they can and try to move on to something else.
Yeah.
I think in the end, I've always been fascinated by the people that only did the drama, because you look at the successful channels. I mean, whether it's yourself or RJ or me or OC Shorts or Jay Coletti or any of these people, none of us do that really. I've messed around. I defend myself when someone mentions me, but I think a lot of these guys, they're at the end of the road. They've hurt their reputation, and now they have nowhere to go. And I think some are talented. Like, I will say, I think there are certain people that can create a new avenue for themselves.
Correct.
But there are some that are just, and I think a lot of this has come, Tom, from commenters that are stirring the fire with people.
Yeah.
They're saying, "Oh, did you hear this person said this?" And it's like, well, I didn't even say that. It's like one person hears one thing, but yeah, it got bad for a while, but yeah, it definitely seems like it's starting to mellow out for sure.
Well, I was talking about a little before a year, about 13, 15 months ago. I was mired in it. I got out of it. I realized, because I looked at my numbers and I didn't care as making extra money. I didn't care as making extra views. I just said, this isn't me, And then I talked about on some of the shows, the Overton window, it's kind of like, like, let's just say MobTube started. You kind of have collaboration here. You have working together here, partnering here. Then you have beefing here, and maybe you have name calling here, right? And then it started moving over to the left, right? And then it was like, okay, now we're past name calling. Let's start doxing, right? And then let's start coming to your house. Then let's start calling CPS. And it got so to the point that I said, somebody is going to get hurt physically or arrested. And you, as a media person, like you said, we're going to get off in about 5 minutes. You're going to hopefully enjoy a nice beer, a nice cocktail, hot chocolate, whatever you desire. I'm going to go to my beautiful wife and enjoy my birthday. But just imagine, like, you getting off of this and then having cops at your door or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I just think that there were some bad actors in general that didn't know media and how it worked. And that was their shtick. But they took it so far that, in general, whether it be the trolls or the people, the Overton window moved so far over that it wasn't fun anymore.
Well, I think and I think there's a certain level of these creators, and there are several of them.
Yeah.
That in really, in the end, if we're looking at them through a psychological profile, they're social rejects. They have nothing else in life. They don't have a family. They don't have a wife. They don't have kids that like them or care about them. They have nothing. They have themselves in this fake online persona where they can become truly whoever they want, right?
Correct,
and we see this in a lot of communities, like these incel communities, where you already have issues, but now you're starting to find people that have the same misguided issues that you do that often become the same as you. And you create these goofy communities that are out to hurt people and to dox people and to understand. It's just really odd. And I think, I hope these people are out there and put on blast for who they are. And it's sad, but when it got to that point, it became a little crazy.
And I'm glad for the most part you stayed out of it and your channel has grown. Check out the Sit Down Chat. This was an honor and pleasure. We haven't been on air and shared a screen in a while. I'm sure we'll do it again very soon. And thank everybody for the well wishes, for the birthday wishes. Chad, thanks for the super sticker. And Jeff, thank you for being on the show.
Appreciate it, Tom. Happy birthday. Appreciate you.
Thanks, brother. Be well.